I teach and study and practice the science of influence, but I'm here today because of people who have influenced me, and also Dylan, thank you for inviting me. The people who have influenced me in conversations, person by person, year by year, to change my life, have been the students that I was supposed to be teaching at Yale School of Management. And these are a series of students from the School for the Environment who showed me what it looked like to step up into influence in the climate space. These students, I apologize to those of you who are here in the audience, and are some of them, I thought they were adorable at first. When I started teaching about 10 years ago, of course I like the earth, who doesn't? And I knew the climate was a problem, but it didn't seem like I could do anything about it, so it didn't feel like my problem. And I watched them, person by person, deciding to change their career, deciding to change the way they got places, deciding to change the things they ate, deciding to make big life decisions like not having children. And they asked me, person by person, difficult questions about what I was doing. What I was doing to try to fix what I saw as the biggest problem on Earth. And if I thought I knew anything about influence, the challenge to me was, what if you can't do anything to fix things? Wouldn't you rather fail trying? And now, people like you doing this work are my favorite people to try to help empower. In this book that I've written, I'm donating 50% of the proceeds to help fight the climate crisis. And I finally understood their message, which is that this is an everybody problem. And what I already knew is that we're all influencing each other, whether we're trying to or not. So the first seed I want to plant for you is that you are so much more influential than you think. Already, these conversations that you have been having over the years, maybe they haven't bloomed yet, or maybe you were somewhere else when they did. Maybe somebody else got to watch it. But we have so much power. By the way, these are a few of the students. They were not trying to save the world when they did this. They were just tricking me on April Fool's Day, telling me all the professors were wearing costumes. They were not. But what happens when I go around the world and I get to talk with all these people about influence, I find many of my favorite people, many of the nicest people on earth, are a little reluctant to practice influence. And what this means is they don't want to be manipulative. That's fine. I don't want to be manipulative either. But when we don't study and practice influence, we're leaving the world in the hands of the power-hungry people who do, because influence is power. For example, when in the 1970s, some scientists came up with the frame of global warming, they were just trying to describe what was happening. It didn't necessarily match up to experience for a lot of people. But then there was a small group of economically motivated people who decided to influence the rest of us, and they hired somebody to come up with the least disturbing frame to describe what was happening. And here we've had climate change stunting the influence that we could have to deal with a problem for the next 30 years. And I know many of you in this room are now working to shift this frame to the climate crisis, which says this is immediate, there's still a chance to fix this, but we have to take action now. Now, I'm not going to be able to teach you the whole psychology of influence in the next 20 minutes, but my promise to you is I will share the most important framework, discuss the fundamental practice, and you will leave with my very favorite influence technique, and it's a tool that's so simple and easy you can put it into practice today. All right? The first piece, this fundamental framework, is from my research discipline of behavioral economics, and it's really psychology, if you're not familiar with it. This fundamental framework idea is that influence doesn't work the way you think because you don't think the way you think. And we have two systems in our minds working together, sometimes in collaboration, sometimes in conflict, that determine 100% of our thoughts and our behavior, our decisions and behavior. The dominant one is an unconscious one. So we're not perceiving its mechanisms. But this piece is a primal piece that I will describe as being like an alligator. This is from Alligator Land in Florida. Raise your hand if you've been to Alligator Land. Come on, y'all are nature lovers. This place is awesome. You should totally go. They build themselves as the alligator capital of the world. There are thousands of alligators there. And you can watch alligator wrestling. You can glide over an alligator-infested swamp on a zip line, hold a baby alligator. You can feed the alligators. And if you want to feed the alligators, you get to toss pieces of meat into this pile of prehistoric beasts. And I thought when I do that, it's going to be a clash of the titans. But first of all, I don't have perfect aim. Second of all, I was wrong. So you toss a piece of meat in, and my piece of meat first landed outside the bite zone of any of the alligators. That's the area between the nose and the tail where they don't have to move their body to get their prey. So that everybody sits there and does absolutely nothing until a bird comes down and picks it up. The next piece of meat I toss lands in the bite zone of an alligator named Buddy, and he snaps it up so quickly I can hardly see him move. Human beings are very, very, very much like alligators. And the dominant system driving our decisions and behavior is this primal one that is constantly scanning the environment for opportunities and threats. But what it does almost all of the time is nothing. The reason why we're like alligators is alligators are the laziest animals on Earth. They can go an incredibly long time without eating. And let me ask you to make a guess. I said incredibly long time. Guess how long an alligator can go without eating?
36 hours.
A number of hours? Okay, 6 months would be crazy, right? But it's 3 years. That's how lazy they are. They're super efficient, really speedy when they take action. Our dominant system that is influencing our decisions and behavior takes almost no conscious thought at all. It's essentially effortless and instantaneous, but it's incredibly, incredibly lazy. So imagine when you're trying to influence someone, if they're like an alligator, what will they probably do? Nothing. What's the effect of your influence attempts? Probably nothing. But you better understand how this gut reaction system works, and this is where we have our habits, our biases. Everything that can be processed unconsciously does. Everything that has to be processed consciously takes effort. And this second system is more like a human judge. Human judges are inherently biased. They're not an algorithm. They're biased by the habits, preferences, gut reactions of that gator system. Because that one is fast, the judge part is slow. And it's biased and processes the information and facts that it gets according to the gator reaction. So behavioral economists call this system 1 and system 2. I use the alligator and the judge because it's more gator friendly, easier to remember. And I've told you this, but you don't have to take it for granted. I want to give you an experience of the alligator and the judge in your own mind, okay? Clear your throat. And look up at the screen, and as I flash a series of words on the screen, say each word aloud. Go.
Red, green, yellow, red, blue, red, yellow.
Perfect. Now, glad you can read. Now, similar, but just say the color instead of the word go.
Green, yellow, red, green, yellow, blue, green.
Perfect. Last one? All right. It's very, very simple, folks. But what happened is your gator brain can read. Everything that you practice through habit becomes instantaneous and relatively effortless. It takes no conscious thought. Like driving is very dangerous and very scary, but if you've gotten some practice, you can drive without thinking about it at all. You were reading without thinking about it at all, and it's so ingrained that it's actually hard not to read. The colors was very simple, but it's just you don't have practice yet, and that was the judge. The gator is the first responder, judge is the second guesser. But you don't always have to use the judge part, and people can't always get to use the judge part. This is a big mistake we make when we're trying to influence people, that we give them a pile of facts and data. We expect them to make the right decision. But we neglected the whole gator piece, and they're either not paying attention to the facts and the data, or they're processing it through the lens of the gator, and they've already made up their decision. Gators are more influential than judges. And even though people care about facts and information, they only use those facts and information after they care and if they have the bandwidth. Here's a research study with actual judges. And these researchers were looking at 1,100 parole decisions. And they mapped out the time of day and the decision. What they found was that at the beginning of the day, a prisoner had about a 2/3 chance of getting to go home to their family. That number went till about 0. There was a huge spike, declined to 0. Another spike, and declined to 0 toward the end of the day. If you have a theory about the spikes, just yell it out. I heard lunch, and you were right. All that was going on here is that judges are working hard and using this judge piece, which takes a lot of conscious effort, and it gets depleted. Even just paying attention is depleting, as you know from going to conferences. Making decisions is depleting, and when we get depleted, also when we're hungry, we start making gator decisions, and the gator tends to do what's easy. In this case, the easy decision is that was a prisoner, send them back to jail. So, every influence attempt should consider the gator first. Everyone is more influenced by the gator than the judge, and that includes real judges. Here's the second piece that I promised you, which is a brief discussion of the fundamental practice of influencing, which you already do every day. You do lots of asking, and you get asked by a lot of people. And it's kind of simple, but it's more complicated than it seems, and it's also more powerful than it seems. What I know about your influence is that the biggest obstacle to it is that you are not asking for nearly enough, or nearly as many people, or nearly as often as you could to be as influential as I absolutely know that you should be. One of the reasons that we don't ask, there are lots of them, but one is that we misunderstand, we miscalibrate when we're perspective taking and putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, where it turns out study after study finds people are way more likely to say yes than we imagine. They're 2 or 3 times more likely to say yes because we're thinking of how hard it would be to say yes, but what they're feeling is how hard it is to say no. I also know that sometimes you don't put yourself out there and ask because you don't know how lovable you are. There's a liking gap. You are 12% more lovable than you realize. So you just don't know how much people like you. You don't know how happy they are to say yes when you come and ask them. But you know how when there's somebody you like, and they come into your office or they call you on the phone, and they're like, hey, I have a great idea. You're just ready to say yes before you even hear what that idea is. And what you don't know is that you're one of those people for a lot of people. You're also holding yourself back from asking for things that are just so crazy you haven't thought of them. One of the things I will encourage you to do after today is to go crazy. Here's an example of just asking, and a crazy ask that some of my students made. And this is in a game that we play in class called the Bigger and Better game. You start with something small, you trade it up for something bigger and better, and then you come to class 1 week later with your biggest, best thing that you've got. And we've had some big things like trees, We've had some big things, like there was a 10-foot statue of Anubis. We've had some valuable things like a weekend at a condo in Hawaii. And the biggest, best thing ever was a pair of students who actually couldn't fit it in the classroom, and they said, Zoe, do you mind bringing the class outside? They had traded up 10 times with business owners in our hometown of New Haven, Connecticut, from a paperclip to, there was a gift certificate for cheese, there were some cupcakes, there was a painting I thought was ugly but was apparently valuable. And the biggest, best thing was a Volkswagen Jetta. It says bigger and better across the windshield. They were ready to call every car dealership in the state because they underestimated how likely people were to say yes. The number of car dealerships they called was 1. And they donated the car to a refugee family from Afghanistan. I have another former student, former TA, who is practicing asking, as many of my former students are from Yale and exec ed programs, organizations everywhere. I love hearing these stories, so if you're one of them, tell me. And this former student is at the White House now, and her great idea was the Climate Corps that's launched this year. Her name is Maggie Thomas, and she has been just asking the president. Dream big. However, as you're asking for more people, more often, dreaming big, you might start to think that, okay, well, this is great. It starts feeling magical, like you have this superpower. And it just feels like we can all go and just ask for stuff, and it's unbelievable. And the people are so happy to say yes. And you experience, like, yes, you're one of those people happy to say yes also. But what you don't realize, because nobody's taught you this, is that we're not all going out and asking is unevenly distributed. It's unevenly distributed in terms of privilege and power. The people with more privilege and more power are more comfortable asking, so they do more of it. For example, there's an asking gap between working class and middle class people in an experiment with kids, which is relevant to you, and I'll explain why. A sociologist named Jessica Calarco observed students in middle school classrooms, and for 1 year in multiple classrooms, she was observing which students asked their teachers for things like extra time or extra help or flexibility, creativity, leniency. And she was marking down which students teachers said yes to, and then she went and interviewed some parents. She had information on the students' socioeconomic background. There were middle-class kids, and there were kids from middle-class families and working-class families. So I've already told you that there's uneven distribution of asking, but it's probably bigger than you think. She found middle-class kids were 7 times more likely to ask their teachers for these things than kids from the working-class families. I can relate to this because I grew up with a poor single mom who taught us to be self-reliant. This is what Jessica Calarco found when she interviewed the parents, is that's exactly what parents in these working class families were teaching their kids: hard work and self-reliance. You might have to work twice as hard as another kid to get the same thing that they have. Middle class parents, on the other hand, were teaching their kids that asking and privilege is in part negotiable and negotiated. The teachers, by the way, were equally likely to say yes to all the kids because they love kids and they want to help out. And that's why I'm sharing this study with you, because I believe you are like those teachers. And what happens is when you are passively, reactively generous to people who come to you and ask, is that you are unintentionally but actively contributing to inequality and injustice. When people have to ask, that's a sign that there is inequality and injustice, and people always have to ask. So when someone comes to you and they ask you for something and you want to say yes, ask yourself, who else could have asked but they didn't? Who else could benefit along with this person? And ask yourself, is there a policy here that should be changed? I told you I would give you my favorite tool of influence, And here it is. It's very, very simple, but I'll share a story that will help it sink into your memory so that your gator brain can keep it and practice it. My favorite influence tool is the magic question. And the question is really simple. It's just, what would it take? To illustrate the power of the magic question, I'll share a story that an American activist, Gloria Steinem, shared when she came to my hometown in Connecticut. And she talked about when she was focused on the problem of sex trafficking. She'd gone to a conference in Zambia. She'd spoken there, and then afterwards she visited a village in a rural area near a game preserve where the previous year 3 young women had been sold into sex trafficking, and nobody had heard from them since. She sits down with a group of women in a circle on a tarp in the middle of a barren field, and she asks the magic question. She asks, what would it take to make sure that no one from this village will be sex trafficked again? They told her, an electric fence. An electric fence. They said, when the corn reaches a certain height, the elephants come and they eat it, they trample it. We have nothing to eat. We have nothing to sell in the market. We have no money to send our kids to school. So she says, listen, if I raise the money for the fence, will you clear the field? Will you build it? They say, yes. She does. They do. She goes back to visit. There's a massive crop of corn. Nobody has been sex trafficked from that village since they got the fence. You might think it was the fence that prevented sex trafficking. I actually don't. The magic question works on multiple levels and multiple ways. That's why it's so cool and so powerful. First of all, it's respectful. It's acknowledging the other person is the expert on their own situation. They know plenty of things that you don't. It's also inviting them into collaborative problem solving rather than trying to pressure them to do a certain thing. The least obvious piece, which is probably the most effective here, is that when they tell you what it will take, if you get that roadmap, when you come back, and that's what has happened, they have implicitly committed to supporting that outcome. So I believe it's the women from the village who prevented sex trafficking in their village once they got the fence, because they asked for that fence. You can ask the magic question in all kinds of situations, just about anybody, and you can even ask it repeatedly of the same person. Once in a while, they'll tell you what it would take is nothing, but it's rarer than you think. I've had managers and leaders who've come through my classes do things like, this is Malum from Turner Networks, who's a strategy director. And this part wasn't his job, but he had a series of questions, conversations, asking the magic question, where he said, what would it take for us to have a paid internship program for underrepresented minorities? And I ran into him over the summer this year, and he said they just graduated their 24th intern from that program. Another participant in a program, this is Dalit from the New York Times. She's a design director. HR is not her job, but she had a series of conversations asking, what would it take for the New York Times to cover as a health benefit employees who wanted to freeze their eggs or their sperm and take control of their reproductive health? It took a year of conversations asking what would it take, until finally the New York Times became the first media company to offer this in the United States as a health benefit. Magic question, what would it take? Go out and ask this question of your people, personally, professionally, and if you ask it of people who you teach it to and they learn it, when you ask each other again and again, you'll just laugh like, the magic question. But it still works. One magic question I want to ask you is, what would it take for us to stop calling people consumers? And how has that contributed to the mess that we're in? The last thought, though, that I want to leave you with is this. And this is the most important one. You are one of the most powerful beings who has ever lived on this planet. Our generation is the most dangerous generation of humans there has ever been. And we are the ones who have the chance to turn things around. We are the ones, not just all of us, humanity living today, who can influence each other, but those of us who live in democracies, and those of us who work in businesses. Businesses and business leaders, politicians have outsized influence, and what we can do and need to do is plant seeds, influence each other, and continue to come together, work together in groups and situations like this where we make friends, we inspire each other, we meet the people we want to say yes to before we hear their great ideas. And we create the support networks that encourage growth, which is one of my new favorite frames. So thank you for that. Stand up if you believe this. We can do this. Let's hear it all together. We can do this. We can do this. And we will. I'm inspired by you. Thank you for your time. And by the way, if you're coming to the breakout session, I'll be giving away a bunch of free books if you want more science and strategies. Thank you, my new friends.